A low wind moves across open fields, carrying with it the scent of damp soil and rain. Lantern light catches on the edges of stone walls, while beneath the surface, silence holds what time has hidden. This is forgotten Iron Age treasures in Yorkshire's earth, relics of a world buried for centuries, where rings, tools, and strange offerings still rest in the dark. You don't need to follow every word. Just let the images drift. Subscribe and tap the bell for more calm history. Tonight, uncover what sleeps beneath Yorkshire's quiet ground. The evening is quiet. A pale mist gathers low over the Yorkshire fields, clinging to hedgerows and drifting slowly across ridges of earth turned by the plow. Somewhere in the distance, the faint toll of a church bell lingers. Though the church itself belongs to a much later time than the stories hidden beneath these hills. You stand at the edge of a field, damp soil soft beneath your boots, and the cool air carries the scent of wet grass and peat. Beneath the surface of this land lies a history that has been folded away, pressed under layers of time, waiting for centuries until curious hands and quiet patience uncovered it again. And you imagine, what would it feel like to kneel here in silence, pressing fingers into dark earth, and suddenly touch something cold and hard, something not shaped by nature, but by human hands long gone. The land holds its secrets tightly, but sometimes in the shifting of soil, in the slow cut of a spade, in the lines traced by archaeologists walking across the morning dew, treasures emerge. Whispers of the Iron Age. The Iron Age in Britain is not just an age of metal, but of survival, of rituals, of small communities gathering on windswept ridges and fertile valleys. In Yorkshire, the soil preserves traces of this age with a quiet stubbornness. You picture wooden roundhouses rising from the earth, smoke curling from their roofs of thatch, the smell of peat fires and roasted grain thick in the winter air. Within, families huddle close to warmth, their lives bound by cycles of harvest and hunger, of ritual and rhythm. Yet, when archaeologists began to explore these lands, they found not only the ash of hearths and fragments of pots, but treasures carefully laid into the ground, weapons folded into silence, ornaments pressed beneath the soil, offerings whose meanings are half known, half lost. For those people, to bury such things was not an accident. It was a message, a ritual, a hope placed deep into the earth. And now, centuries later, as spades and brushes reveal them again, you feel a strange stillness, as though the air itself remembers the hands that placed them there. The chariot in the ground, one of the most haunting discoveries, lay beneath a field in East Yorkshire. A chariot, complete with its wheels and harness, carefully buried as though the person it belonged to was meant to ride it into another world. You close your eyes and picture it, a wooden frame now turned to shadow, the iron fittings glinting faintly when uncovered by lamplight, the outline of horses, once proud and strong, now only impressions in soil, and beside it, the remains of the one who was buried with such care, perhaps a leader, perhaps a warrior, perhaps someone whose place in their community demanded a passage unlike others. The silence around such a discovery is heavy. You imagine the ceremonies centuries ago, villagers gathered, torches flickering, breath rising in the cold air, the sound of soil falling slowly, covering wheel and frame until nothing remained but memory and earth. And centuries later, the sound again, but this time spades, careful hands, brushing away, uncovering what had been hidden. Two silences, separated by time, meeting in a single moment of rediscovery. The sound of metal and soil iron itself was once a wonder. Before there was bronze, softer, shining warmly, but rare. Then came the iron blades, stronger, darker, carrying with them both survival and danger. In Yorkshire's fields, archaeologists found iron sickles bent deliberately before being buried, axes and swords, broken not through battle, but by choice. It was as though people believed the objects carried spirits, and to return them to the ground, they first had to be silenced. You hear it in your imagination, the clang of a hammer striking, the sharp crack as a blade breaks. Then the hush of voices chanting, the rustle of cloaks in the wind, the long pause as the broken pieces are lowered into a pit. And above it all, the night closing in. The sky, vast and star-heavy. The earth swallowing its gifts in stillness. Now, as those objects lie under glass in quiet museums, you notice how their edges are dulled, their surfaces rusted, but the sense of ritual clings to them still. They are not only tools or weapons, they are stories folded into silence. Midway re-anchor if you are still listening. Notice how time feels slower now. The sound of words drifts like mist, and you don't have to hold on to every detail. It is enough to let it pass, like footsteps fading on a foggy road. Ornaments of the living, treasures of the dead in graves scattered across Yorkshire. Small ornaments rest beside bones. Brooches shaped in spirals. Beads of glass, their colors still faintly shining after centuries in soil. Rings of bronze, once worn at the wrist or around the neck. Asterisk, you imagine the light catching those beads in firelight long ago. The feel of cool bronze against skin. The pride of a craftsman shaping patterns into metal. Or of a family giving such objects to the earth when one of their own passed into silence. And so much of it seems both ordinary and sacred at once. A bead that might have once been a child's plaything becomes, when buried, a token of eternity. A brooch that fastened a cloak becomes, when hidden into soil, a promise or a farewell. You cannot help but wonder how many such treasures still lie waiting, unseen beneath fields where sheep graze and tractors hum. The rhythm of discovery in the modern age. Discovery comes not only with spades, but with machines that scan the ground, tracing shadows of what lies beneath. A faint line in soil, a change in vegetation, a signal from below. Yet for all our technology, the moment of unearthing is still fragile. A brush moving slowly across metal, the sudden gleam in torchlight, the hush that falls over those watching, as though the air itself respects the return of something long forgotten. And when such objects are lifted from earth, there is always a pause, a sense of crossing between two worlds. What was meant for silence, for burial, is brought back into light. What was hidden becomes known again. It is not only an act of archaeology, but of communion, a dialogue across centuries. A land that remembers Yorkshire's soil is heavy, damp, often stubborn. Yet it remembers. It holds not only seeds and roots, but the impressions of wood long decayed, the outlines of ditches and post holes, the shadows of lives lived in rhythm with the earth. Walk across a plowed field here, and you see nothing but mud. Yet beneath lie traces of walls, of hearths, of tools, of lives. And when rain falls, the ground releases faint scents of iron, of clay, of peat, as though exhaling its memory into the air. You pause, breathing with it, and feel the centuries blur. For those who once walked here, the soil was not mute. It was alive, listening, carrying offerings deeper with each season. Closing drift and mist has thickened now. The hedgerows are little more than shadows. The earth underfoot feels cool, damp, unyielding. Yet within it lies the warmth of human hands that placed treasures long ago. Iron bent and silenced. Ornaments bright and worn. Wheels of a chariot hidden in soil. All folded beneath the ground. All forgotten for centuries until curiosity brushed them back into air. And you cannot help but wonder, softly, how many more treasures lie waiting still. Hidden in the quiet earth of Yorkshire, patient, unseen, listening beneath the silence of the fields. The night is long. A faint moon lingers above the rolling ridges of Yorkshire, its pale glow softened by drifting clouds. You hear the sigh of wind in the grass, and far away the low call of an owl. Yet beneath the surface of this quiet landscape, another kind of night still lingers, the darkness of centuries, when the earth was shaped not by plow and machine, but by the hands of those who lived through seasons of hunger and harvest, war and silence. And in that darkness, treasures were placed, not for wealth, not for display, but for reasons bound in ritual. You imagine a circle of people gathered around a fire. The smell of wood smoke drifts into the night air. Sparks rise into the blackness like stars breaking free from earth. In the center, an object, a sword, or an ornament, or a vessel filled with grain waits to be offered. The Iron Age people of Yorkshire lived with a closeness to earth that we can only faintly sense now. To them, soil was not only ground, but spirit. Rivers carried not only water, but voices. Fire consumed not only wood, but prayers. And so, when something precious was placed into the earth, it was not lost, but given. The burning of offerings, archaeologists uncover layers of ash beneath certain mounds. Places where fires once blazed and objects were consumed in flames before being covered with soil. You picture the scene, the crackle of burning wood, the roar of flame against the cold of winter. People stand close, their cloaks pulled tight, their faces lit orange by fire. Into the blaze, items are cast, broken tools, fragments of pottery, perhaps the remains of food. The fire devours them, and the ashes sink into earth. The smell is sharp, iron warming, clay breaking, grain charring. The heat on your face contrasts with the chill wind at your back, and slowly the ritual shifts. The fire dies to embers. Soil is carried in baskets, poured gently over the remains. Poured gently over the remains. The ground closes once more, dark and silent, hiding within it both memory and ash. For us, such fragments appear meaningless. Yet for them, it was part of survival, to give back in order to receive, to feed the earth so that it might feed them again. Treasures bent into silence in many graves and pits. Swords, spears, and tools are found deliberately broken, the sharpness removed, the strength of metal undone. At first, this puzzled archaeologists. Why destroy something valuable before burying it? But think of it as releasing a spirit. To break the sword was to quiet the power it held. To bend an iron tool was to shift it from the world of the living to the realm of the unseen. You hear the echo of that act, a clang of hammer, the groan of iron bending, the sudden snap of something once whole. Then the hush of night returning after the sound fades. Imagine standing in that silence, holding the broken piece, toning it would never cut nor strike again, but would instead lie beneath the soil forever. That gesture, that deliberate unmaking, was itself the offering, and perhaps, in their belief, the spirit of the object was not destroyed, but freed to accompany its owner into the next world. The ritual of water, it was not only in soil that treasures were hidden. Rivers, too, received their share. In the lands of Yorkshire, certain streams and springs reveal fragments of offerings cast into water. You stand by such a stream in your mind, the sound of water rushing, gurgling over stones, the air damp and cool. A figure kneels at the edge, holding something gleaming, a bronze brooch, an iron blade, a necklace strung with beads. A hand hesitates, the object catching torchlight one last time, and then it is let go. The splash is soft, circles widen across the surface. The object sinks, the water closing above it. The sound of rushing continues, as though nothing had happened, yet beneath lies the offering, unseen but not forgotten. For people of that time, water was a passage, a mirror between worlds. To give to the river was to let something travel, not only downstream, but into the unseen. And centuries later, when such objects are pulled from mud or silt, you can almost hear the echo of that splash, that soft farewell whispered to the water. The circle of life and death at the heart of these traditions was not wealth, but rhythm. The Iron Age people lived by cycles, sowing and harvest, birth and death, winter and spring. Each cycle required balance, and balance was sought through ritual. When someone died, treasures were placed beside them, a sword to guard them, a brooch to adorn them, food to feed them. But when a harvest was gathered, treasures were also placed in soil, sickles broken, pots buried with grain. And when wars ended, treasures were bent and hidden, as though to quiet the memory of violence. The earth was not only a place of burial, but a participant in this cycle. It received, it held, and in return, it gave. And now, as archaeologists kneel in those same fields, brushing soil away with care, they join this cycle too. They uncover what was given, they study it, and then they too must decide, return it to silence or place it on display. Midway re-anchor. If you are still listening, notice how time feels slower now. The words are like footsteps across wet grass, fading as quickly as they come. You don't have to remember each name or detail. It is enough to drift with the rhythm, to let history carry you like a slow river. The stories of graves among the most haunting discoveries are those of the dead themselves, buried with treasures that spoke of their lives. In Yorkshire, some graves held warriors, their weapons bent, chariots dismantled, their ornaments placed carefully on their bodies. Others belonged to women who wore brooches of bronze and beads of glass, still faintly colored after centuries in soil. And others still two children, their small forms surrounded by tokens, perhaps toys, perhaps charms, placed with quiet love. You kneel in imagination beside such a grave. The soil is dark, the air still. Slowly, the outlines appear, a curve of bone, a shimmer of bronze, a bead that catches the light. And you feel a weight of silence, as though the voices of those who mourned linger faintly in the air, whispering across centuries. These treasures are not only objects, they are gestures frozen in earth. It's the last touch of a hand arranging, the last word spoken, the last look before the soil was poured. A land of hidden memory. Walk across Yorkshire today, and you see farmland, villages, stone walls, marking fields. But beneath lies a layer of hidden memory. Every hill may hold a mound, every valley a ditch, every field a treasure unseen. The soil itself is thick with history. Rain brings scents of clay and peat, also something heavier, the sense that you walk not on empty ground, but on centuries of life. Each step feels like a quiet echo. Archaeologists speak of finds, but each find is also a story. A shard of pottery is not only clay, it is the remnant of a hand shaping, of a fire burning, of a meal shared. An iron brooch is not only metal, it is a life once adorned, a burial once grieved, a ritual once spoken. And so the land whispers constantly, though softly, closing drift as the mist rises again. You picture the treasures still lying hidden, chariots unbroken, ornaments still bright, blades still bent. The soil keeps them close, quiet, waiting, and you cannot help but wonder, in the silence, when the next spade strikes earth, what story will return to light? The rain begins again, a fine drizzle that clings to the air and softens the outlines of hedges and fields. You hear it tapping gently against leaves, a faint hiss as it falls into tall grass. The sky is pale and heavy, a low ceiling pressing close to the land, and beneath it you picture the earth layered not only with roots and stones, but with centuries of memory. For archaeologists walking across Yorkshire, each step is filled with possibility. A small rise on the ground, a faint circle seen from above, a scatter of darker soil. These are whispers of what lies below. And in the last century, with new tools and patient searching, the Iron Age treasures of this land have begun to speak again. But each discovery is not only an object, not only metal or clay. It is a doorway to lives once lived, to rituals once performed, to voices that cannot be heard but can still be imagined in the silence. The slow uncovering archaeology is not a hurried science. It moves at the pace of earth itself. You picture a trench cut gently into soil, its edges straight, its bottom damp and smelling faintly of clay. Diggers kneel with brushes, their breaths misting in the cool morning. A fragment emerges first. Just a curve, a hint of something different than the soil around it. The brush moves slowly, revealing shape, texture, color, and then a pause. The long moment of silence as those present realize what they have touched. Perhaps it is a brooch of bronze, its spirals still faintly patterned. Perhaps a shard of pottery, the fingerprint of its maker still pressed into clay. Perhaps something greater, the dark outline of a wheel, the fittings of a chariot, the bones of horses once laid carefully beside their master. And in that moment, modern time feels thin. It's the sound of distant traffic, the hum of farm machinery. All fades, and for a breath, it feels as though you were standing in 2 centuries at once. The present, and the long vanished past. The museum's silence when such treasures are lifted from earth, cleaned and placed within glass. A different kind of silence surrounds them. You walk into a museum gallery, the air still and faintly cool. The lights shine softly, and there, behind clear glass, lies an ornament or a weapon that once belonged to someone in Yorkshire nearly 2,000 years ago. You lean closer. The surface is rough, darkened by rust, but in places a faint shine lingers. The curves of its design remain. The weight of it, though you cannot touch it, seems present, heavy with meaning. Can you imagine the journey it has taken from fire to forge, from hand to earth, from earth to display? Each stage a silence, each stage a kind of offering. Visitors pass by, their footsteps hushed, their voices low, and perhaps none of them knows the name of the one who owned this treasure. Perhaps that name is lost forever. Yet the object itself continues to speak softly across centuries. The scholars debate around these treasures. Scholars gather and argue gently. Were the broken swords sacrifices? Were the buried chariots symbols of power or vessels for travel into another world? Did the people of Yorkshire see their earth as sacred ground, or as battlefield, or as home? The answers shift like mist across the fields. Evidence suggests patterns, but patterns are never final. And you, listening, do not need to follow every detail. You only need to feel the weight of the questions, the way they hang in the air. Because history is not always certain. It is not a list of facts, but a river of interpretations flowing between silence and sound. Midway re-anchor, if you're still listening. Notice how time feels slower now. You don't have to remember every argument or every theory. Let them drift like leaves on water. It is enough to drift with the rhythm of the words and let the story carry you gently onward. The memory of landscape, even without spades or machines. You can feel the memory of the Iron Age in Yorkshire's landscape. Hillforts rise faintly, their ridges softened by grass. Fields still follow lines first carved into the soil thousands of years ago. The names of places carry echoes of ancient speech. And in the quiet of evening, when mist drapes the valleys and the air grows still, you can almost imagine the glow of hearth fires within roundhouses, the distant bark of a dog, the murmur of voices carried on the wind. The land does not forget. It holds these impressions like faint scars, barely seen but never erased. The return of treasures. Some discoveries come not through excavation, but by chance. A farmer turning his field feels his plow strike something hard, and when he looks, it is a fragment of iron. A child walking finds a bead, right, even in the mud. Rain washes away soil and reveals the curve of pottery. These moments remind us that the earth still holds countless treasures, waiting patiently. Some may remain hidden forever. Others may appear tomorrow, revealed by accident, carried again into light. And when they do, they join the long chain of memory from the hands that made them, to the hands that buried them, to the hands that uncovered them once more. The emotional weight for those who uncovered these treasures. There is always a moment of quiet emotion. To hold something that was last touched 2,000 years ago is to feel a bridge open between times. The smoothness of bronze, the roughness of rust. The faint design pressed by another hand. It is as though someone long dead still whispers faintly through material things, and you imagine the life behind it. The warrior who wore the brooch, the farmer who bent the sickle, the child who played with the bead. Their voices are gone, their names forgotten, but their gestures remain, folded into the objects they left behind. This is the true treasure, not the metal itself, but the connection it carries. Closing drift, the rain has eased now. The mist clings low, softening the outlines of hedges and ridges. The earth feels heavy, damp, but alive. Beneath it, treasures still wait, quiet and unseen. Some have returned to light. Some still sleep in soil. All carry the weight of human touch, human belief, human silence. And you cannot help but wonder, softly, how many lives remain folded into the earth? How many stories lie waiting beneath Yorkshire's soil, patient and listening, as centuries drift above them like clouds? The dawn comes slowly in Yorkshire. Mist drifts low across valleys, and the sky begins not with brightness, but with the faint lifting of shadows. You hear the caw of crows rising from hedgerows, the rustle of damp grass brushed by wind, and in the pale light, the outlines of hills and ridges grow sharper, revealing more than scenery, revealing memory. For in this land, the hills are not only hills, they are monuments, shaped and reshaped by people who lived here in the Iron Age. The ditches that curl across slopes, the ridges that crown certain summits, the faint rings that mark ancient boundaries, all are echoes of lives lived in rhythm with ritual. And as you walk across the land in your mind, you begin to sense that every shape, every mound, every curve in soil is part of a larger pattern, a pattern not drawn on paper, but etched into earth. Hill forts on the horizon in the Iron Age. Certain heights were chosen, and there people built their fortresses. Yet these hill forts were not castles of stone. They were banks of earth, ditches cut deep, palisades of wood rising above. Some were large, holding many families. Others were small, more symbolic than practical. You picture one now? The slope is steep, the climb slow. Your breath comes heavy as you reach the crest. And there the view spreads wide, valleys rolling, rivers glinting, forests dark at the edge. The wind is stronger here, carrying scents of peat and wood smoke. Around you, the banks form circles, enclosed in space, within roundhouses cluster. Fires burn in hearths. People move between them, their voices faint in the wind. Such hill forts were more than protection. They were gathering places, symbols of strength, anchors of community. And when night fell, torches burned on the heights, their glow visible for miles. The land itself became marked, not empty wilderness, but territory defined by human will. Now, centuries later, only the ridges remain, softened by grass. Sheep graze across them, their hooves tapping faintly on soil. The voices are gone, but the shape holds memory, like a scar that time has not erased. Ritual fields beyond the forts. The fields themselves carried meaning. Archaeologists walking with eyes trained on soil have found faint traces, straight lines, patterns, grids that once marked boundaries. These were not random. They were carefully laid, dividing space for crops, for grazing, for ritual. Some aligned with ridges or rivers, as though drawn by both need and belief. You walk across one such field in your imagination. The soil is dark, freshly turned. You bend, picking up a shard of pottery, the curve of a rim once used to hold grain. Around you, faint lines in the ground mark where ditches once cut. The rhythm of labor echoes faintly, hoes striking soil, grain threshed and gathered, laughter carried on the wind. And yet, within these same fields, treasures were sometimes buried, not only tools, but ornaments, offerings, placed deliberately into the furrows. Work and ritual, survival and belief, bound together in earth. Water is boundary in the Yorkshire landscape. Rivers cut their way through valleys, slow and meandering. They glint in the morning light. Their surface is silver, their edges lined with reeds. To the Iron Age people, these were not only routes of travel, but boundaries between worlds. Many offerings lie in water, swords bent and cast into streams, ornaments lowered into springs. For them, water was alive. To place something within it was to send it elsewhere, to allow it to cross between this world and another. You hear it now, the slow sound of water rushing over stones, the drip of rain falling from branches into pools. You see a figure kneel, holding a blade. The metal catches faint light, then falls, splashing softly, vanishing into depths. The ripples widen, then fade. The surface smooths, as though nothing had happened. But beneath, the offering rests, joining countless others hidden in silence. And centuries later, when such items are pulled from river mud, the silence breaks again, reminding us of beliefs carried by water's endless flow. Midway, re-anchor. If you're still listening, notice how gently the story drifts. You don't need to follow every detail. It is enough to let the rhythm carry you, like mist sliding across hills or water flowing over stones. Time feels slower now, softer, stretched like the hush of dawn. The role of ancestors to the Iron Age people, the dead were not gone. They lingered in the land. Mounds and graves dotted the countryside, visible reminders that the past remained close. You stand beside one such mound in imagination. It rises low, covered in grass, sheep grazing near its edge. The wind moves softly, bending blades of grass. Beneath lie bones, ornaments, offerings, lives folded into earth. Perhaps families gathered here, returning to speak, to remember, to perform rites. Perhaps fires were lit on the mound's crest, flames flickering against the night sky. The voices of the living and the silence of the dead mingling in one place. And when new generations plowed the fields, they saw these mounds not as obstacles, but as anchors. The land was not empty. It was filled with memory. Each ridge, each burial, each offering linked them to those who had come before. The cycle of fire was central to these rituals, not only for warmth, not only for cooking, but for transformation. Imagine a great fire burning at the edge of a hill fort. People gather, their faces lit orange, their shadows long. Into the blaze go offerings, grain, broken tools, fragments of ornament. The fire roars, the heat pressing against your skin, the smoke sting in your eyes. Then silence as embers glow. Soil poured gently to cover them. The cycle complete. And centuries later, archaeologists uncover layers of charcoal, fragments of burned bone, shards of pottery cracked by heat, evidence of fire long gone, yet still carrying echoes. Fire consumed, fire transformed, fire connected. To destroy in flames was not to end, but to change. The watching hills in certain places. Archaeologists note how structures align with hills and horizons. A circle of ditches faces the rising sun. A burial mound looks toward a river valley. A settlement sits where two ridges meet. This was not chance. To live in the Iron Age was to live with the land, to place meaning into direction and shape. The hills were not background, but participants. They framed rituals, witnessed offerings, carried memory. You stand on such a ridge in imagination. The wind is strong, carrying the smell of wet grass and peat. The horizon stretches wide, and for a moment you feel both small and connected. A single figure in a landscape shaped by countless lives before you. Closing drift, the drizzle has eased, leaving the air damp and fresh. The fields glisten faintly, the soil dark and rich. Beneath, treasures still rest, blades bent, ornaments buried, ashes pressed into soil. And as you walk slowly across the land in your mind, you feel the weight of memory. Each step is a quiet echo. Each breath carries both present air and ancient silence. And you cannot help but wonder when you walk this land today. How much of what you see is shaped not only by nature, but by the hands and hopes of those who lived here long ago, whose treasures still sleep beneath Yorkshire's earth. Yorkshire's earth. The mist of morning does not vanish quickly here. It lingers, heavy in the hollows, stretching across valleys as if the land itself is reluctant to wake. You hear the faint drip of dew falling from hedgerows, the soft shuffle of sheep moving through wet grass, and within this half-light, you begin to picture the lives of Iron Age people, not as distant shadows, but as men and women stepping carefully through the damp fields, carrying the objects that once were their treasures. For to them, treasure was not always gold. It was bronze hammered into brooches, iron forged into blades, salt crystals glittering in leather bags, cattle lowing in wooden pens. The meaning of wealth was bound not only to beauty, but to survival. And so, let us walk slowly with them and see how these treasures moved through their days. Metal in the firelight. Imagine the roundhouse now. Its roof is thatched, its walls woven from wattle, daubed with clay. Smoke curls upward from the central hearth, escaping through a hole above. The air smells of wood smoke, of damp earth, of wool drying near the fire. In the glow of that firelight, a man bends over a small anvil. He lifts a hammer, striking red-hot iron. Sparks leap, flickering against the darkness. Around him, others watch, children hushed, women spinning thread. The sound of a loom creaking faintly in the shadows. The shape he forms is not a grand ornament. It is a blade, small but sharp. A sickle for harvest, perhaps, or a knife for butchering. Useful, practical, precious. The glow of iron in the hearth becomes its own treasure, not only because it cuts or defends, but because it represents skill, effort, and survival. Later, when the blade grows dull or breaks, it may be offered back to the earth, buried in a pit, its service complete. The cycle of use and offering continues, metal flowing from fire to field, from hand to soil, never simply discarded, always given meaning. Salt and survival beyond metals. Another treasure filled their world: salt. Close your eyes and imagine walking north toward the Yorkshire coast. The air sharpens, carrying the smell of brine. You hear gulls calling, waves breaking against rocks. In the shallows, fires burn. Seawater is boiled in clay vessels, leaving behind crystals of white. Salt was survival. With it, meat could be preserved through winter. Fish carried inland, feasts prepared when harvest failed. To hold a bag of salt was to hold time itself, the promise of food lasting longer, of hunger delayed. And so, blocks of salt moved inland along ancient tracks. They passed from hand to hand, traded for cattle, for grain, for ornaments. Salt was treasure, not because it sparkled, but because it sustained. Even today, traces of salt working remain along the Yorkshire coast. Shards of clay vessels, cracked by fire, buried in dunes. Quiet reminders of the value once drawn from sea and flame. Cattle as currency step into a pasture in your imagination. The grass is damp, and the low sound of cattle fills the air. Horns curve against the morning mist. Hides glisten with dew. A young boy moves among them, carrying a stick, guiding them toward water. In the Iron Age, cattle were more than animals. They were wealth, status, measure of exchange, a gift of cattle-sealed alliances. A herd marked the strength of a family. To lose them was to lose standing, to lose survival. Picture now a gathering between families. Fires burn at the edge of a hill fort. Men and women approach, leading cattle with ropes. The animals snort, hooves stamping the soil. Voices rise, bargains struck, agreements sealed. A cow passes from one family to another, not only as trade, but as bond. And when archaeologists later uncover bones buried in pits, sometimes with care, sometimes with signs of feasting, they are reminded that cattle were not only wealth, but offerings, gifts to gods, or to ancestors, or to the earth itself. Ornaments of meaning beyond survival. There were ornaments, brooches of bronze, torques of twisted gold, glass beads strung on cord. You see them glint now in firelight, worn against woolen cloaks, fastened at shoulders, hanging from necks. But these were not merely for beauty. Each carried meaning. A torque could mark rank. A brooch could show allegiance. A bead might carry memory of distant lands. Some were worn in life, others buried in death. Some were broken deliberately, their fragments scattered, as though the object itself carried a spirit that needed release. And centuries later, when such ornaments are lifted from soil, their surfaces green with age, their glass dulled but still glinting faintly, you can almost imagine the hands that once fastened them, the warmth of skin against cold metal, the pride carried in every gesture. The paths of trade, the treasures of the Iron Age, did not remain fixed. They moved. From the Yorkshire coast came salt. From the Pennines or, from the south, pottery and wine carried from distant lands. From across the sea, glass beads and rare ornaments. You imagine the tracks now. Narrow paths winding through forests, bogs, and hills. The sound of footsteps, of carts creaking, of cattle lowing. The smell of damp earth rising with each step. Along these paths, treasures moved not only as goods, but as stories. Each trade carried memory of distance, of contact, of connection. A glass bead worn in Yorkshire might once have caught light in Gaul. A shard of wine amphora might once have stood on a Roman ship. Long before legions ever marched north, the land was not isolated. Even in the Iron Age, it was linked by webs of trade. Invisible lines stretched across rivers, seas, and ridges, ritual offerings of wealth. And yet, for all their value, many treasures were not kept. They were given away. Archaeologists find hoards buried in pits, blades bent, ornaments broken, coins scattered. At first glance, it seems wasteful, but to those who buried them, it was essential. To give away wealth was to speak with gods, to secure favor, to mark turning points. You imagine now a gathering at dusk. Fires burn, shadows lengthen. A pit is dug. Into it go ornaments, blades, brooches, each placed with care. Soil is pressed over, fire lit above. The earth takes them, and silence returns. And centuries later, when spades uncovered these hoards, they reveal not only wealth, but belief. The soil becomes a book, each buried object, a line of text in a language of ritual. Midway, re-anchoring, you're still listening. Notice how the story drifts gently. You don't need to hold every detail. It's enough to let the rhythm move you, like footsteps on an ancient path, like ripples on a quiet stream. Time feels slower now, softer, stretching like the haze of dusk. The gathering of tribes in the Iron Age communities were not solitary. They gathered in tribes, their identities marked by objects, by rituals, by shared memory. Picture one such gathering. A wide field, tents, and fires scattered across it. The sound of laughter, of cattle lowing, of blades being sharpened. Ornaments glint in torchlight, banners flap in the wind. Here, treasures are exchanged, cattle gifted, ornaments displayed, salt traded, but also rituals performed, fires lit, offerings buried, words spoken to ancestors. The treasures themselves become symbols of identity, passed hand to hand not merely for use, but to mark belonging. The echo of drums among these gatherings, there is sound. The steady thump of drums, the call of horns. You hear it faintly now, low, rhythmic, carrying across the field. It echoes through the night, weaving with the crackle of fire, the murmur of voices. Perhaps the drums called to gods. Perhaps they marked the beat of trade, of ritual, of unity. We cannot know for certain, but the echo lingers, carved into silence, remembered in fragments of instruments, buried deep in soil. And as you listen, you realize that even sound itself was treasure not stored in earth, but carried in memory. woven into nights of ritual and exchange. Closing drift, the mist thickens again. The hills grow faint, the fields blur into haze. Beneath, treasures remain, blades, brooches, beads, bones. Above, the sky darkens. Stars faint in the distance, and as you walk in imagination across these ancient fields, you sense how treasure was never only wealth. It was survival, identity, offering, memory. Each object carried meaning. Each exchange wove bonds. Each burial marked belief, and you cannot help but wonder how many treasures still rest unseen beneath Yorkshire's earth. Their stories folded in silence, waiting for hands to uncover them, or perhaps never to be touched again. The mist lies heavy over the Yorkshire hills again. You feel it pressing softly against your skin, damp and cool, carrying the faint smell of heather and wet stone. Somewhere in the distance, you hear the slow trickle of a stream, winding down through peat and rock, carrying its waters toward rivers that will one day meet the sea. And it is here, standing on this quiet slope, that you begin to sense something larger. For though the treasures of the Iron Age were buried in Yorkshire's earth, their stories stretched far beyond its valleys. Every bead, every brooch, every hoard told not only of local lives, but of connections that reached outward across hills, across seas, across the boundaries of known lands. In this way, the treasures of Yorkshire were never just local things. They were part of a web that bound Iron Age Britain to the wider world. The shine of distant glass. You picture a small bead lying now in a museum case, its surface smooth, its color deep blue-green. It is small enough to fit in a child's palm, yet it carries within it the memory of journeys across seas. For such glass beads were not made in Yorkshire. They came from workshops far away, some in Gaul, some perhaps even farther east, where artisans melted sand and ash into molten fire, shaping it into colors that caught the light. When these beads found their way into Yorkshire, they were treasures of wonder. Imagine the awe of someone who had never seen glass before, its brightness in firelight, its glow against skin. To wear such a bead was to carry not only beauty, but distance. It whispered of lands unseen, of stories carried by traders and travelers. The soil of Yorkshire holds these whispers still, and when archaeologists uncover them, their surfaces dulled by time. They remind us that even in the Iron Age, this land was not isolated. It was part of currents that flowed across seas. Free in the earth step, now into another image. A pit dug within a hillfort. At its bottom lie fragments of pottery, thick, curved, with traces of reddish clay. To the untrained eye, they may seem like any other shard, but look closer and you find the marks of Roman amphorae vessels that once carried wine or oil across the sea, long before legions set foot in Britain. Fragments of amphorae were already arriving, carried by traders, perhaps exchanged for metals, hides, or slaves. Imagine the strangeness of such an object in an Iron Age settlement. Heavy, foreign, filled with liquid, unlike anything brewed from local grain or honey. To sip from it would be to taste the Mediterranean itself, to bring the sun of distant lands into the damp mist of Yorkshire. And then, when empty, the amphora might be broken, its shards buried, not only as waste, but perhaps as offering of foreign treasure given back to the earth. The iron within the hills yet treasure also moved outward. From the Yorkshire hills themselves came iron forged from ores in the pennies, hammered into blades and tools. Picture the forges glowing red in the dark valleys, smoke curling into mist. Picture the ring of hammers echoing across stone. These blades did not always remain in Yorkshire. Some traveled, carried south or east, exchanged for ornaments, salt, or cattle. In this way, Yorkshire gave as much as it received. Its hills held resources that bounded into trade networks stretching beyond sight. Each object forged here carried not only utility, but connection, a silent link between this land and others, the invisible threads of movement. Till it's tempting to imagine the Iron Age as a time of isolation. Each valley cut off by hills, each tribe living in solitude. The treasures reveal otherwise. They show movement, exchange, contact. They show that even without roads as we know them, paths existed across ridges, along rivers, across seas. Close your eyes for a moment and hear it. The slow creak of a cartwheel, the steady beat of footsteps on earth, the lowing of cattle driven along a track, the murmur of voices in unfamiliar tongues. These sounds remind us that Yorkshire was part of a living web, an ancient network of movement, where goods and stories traveled together. A brooch in one place could echo the style of another far away. A bead could carry the glint of a distant fire. And so, treasures in Yorkshire were never only local. They were global in their own quiet way. Midway, re-anchor, you're still listening. Notice how softly the story moves. You don't have to follow each detail. It's enough to let the images drift past, like mist rolling across hills, like ripples widening across a pond. Time feels slower now, softer, almost stilled. Rituals across distant treasures, also connected through ritual. A torque of gold buried in one land echoed the burial of another across the sea. A hoard in Yorkshire mirrored hoards in Gaul. Patterns repeat, suggesting that belief itself was part of this web. Imagine now a ritual gathering, fires burning, drums echoing. A brooch is lifted, broken, buried. At the same moment, across the sea, another group buries another brooch. They may not have known each other, yet their actions connect, like mirrors reflecting across distance. In this way, ritual itself was a thread, invisible but strong, a shared understanding that wealth was not only to be used, but to be given away. The stories carried by objects. Think again of a bead, a brooch, a shard of amphora. Each is an object, but each also carries story. A bead may tell of a journey from Gaul. A brooch may tell of identity within a tribe. A shard may tell of a feast where foreign wine was poured. And when these objects are buried, they become more than stories. They become messages. Messages to gods, to ancestors, to the earth itself. Now, centuries later, when they are uncovered, carry yet another story, one of endurance. They remind us that even the smallest object can cross time, carrying memory through silence. The horizon beyond sight. Stand again on a Yorkshire hilltop in your imagination. The mist clears for a moment. You see valleys stretching outward, rivers winding, forests spreading. And beyond, though unseen, lie seas, lands, people in the Iron Age. Treasures were bridges across this horizon. They carried the touch of other lands, the echo of other voices, the glint of other fires. To hold such a treasure was to hold the horizon itself, a piece of the distant brought near, a reminder that one's own world was part of something greater. Closing drifts, the mist folds in again. The hills fade, the rivers blur, the fires grow faint. You're left with silence, with the faint sound of wind across grass. Beneath the soil, treasures remain, beads, brooches, blades, ampery shards, each a thread, each a connection, each a whisper of distance. And you cannot help but wonder, how many other connections lie hidden still? How many unseen treasures rest beneath the fields? How many stories of movement and contact remain folded in the earth, waiting to remind us that no land is ever truly alone? Asterisk, the night folds in slowly, and you imagine yourself walking across a quiet Iron Age landscape. The air is cool, damp with the smell of moss and earth. You hear the faint rustle of wind through heather and the distant call of an owl, echoing against the slope of a hill. Beneath your feet, the ground feels soft, yet heavy with memory. For this was not only land for living, but land for giving. To those of the Iron Age, Earth itself was alive. Hills held spirits, rivers carried voices, and forests whispered with the unseen. And so, when treasures were buried, they were not discarded. They were offered, returned to the earth as gifts to powers beyond sight. Gold folded into silence picture, a torque, a heavy ring of gold. Its surface twisted into elegant patterns. It gleams in firelight as it is lifted high. Around it, people gather in a hush, the night air filled with the smell of burning pine. And then, with deliberate care, the torque is bent, broken, made useless for the living. Why destroy such beauty? To us, it feels like loss, but to them, it was transformation. By breaking the torque, its power was released from human hands and given to the unseen. The earth would hold it now, not as wealth, but as offering. Archaeologists call this ritual deposition. To those who lived then, it was an act of reverence, of dialogue with God's ancestors or spirits of the land. Each buried piece was a prayer, spoken not in words, but in metal. And when you walk through misty fields today, you may pass over places where such prayers still lie, folded in silence, waiting beneath layers of soil. Rivers that swallowed treasure. Not all offerings went into the ground. Many were given to water. Imagine standing at the edge of a slow-moving river at dawn. Mist curls over its surface, and the water reflects the pale glow of the rising sun. A warrior approaches, holding his sword. The blade gleams, worn from battle, sharp still. He kneels, whispers something low, and with a sudden movement, casts it into the depths. The splash fades quickly, swallowed by current. The sword sinks, vanishing into silence. Such acts were not rare. Rivers across Britain, including those that once wound through Yorkshire, have yielded treasures, swords, shields, ornaments, placed there intentionally. To give to the river was to acknowledge its spirit, its power, for water gave life, but it could also take it. By feeding it treasure, one showed respect, sought favor, or asked for protection, and so, beneath calm waters, treasures sleep still, carried slowly by silt, folded into the earth's flowing veins. The stillness of burial mounds. Move now in your mind to the base of a hill. There stands a mound, rounded, grass-covered, silent. To passers-by today, it may seem only a swelling of earth, but to those who built it, it was sacred space. Burial mounds often held not only bodies, but offerings, ornaments, tools, vessels. Imagine the moment, a body laid to rest, surrounded by objects that held meaning. A brooch that once fastened a cloak, a blade that once served in battle, a vessel that once carried drink, each chosen carefully, each placed with care. The air would be heavy with wood smoke, the murmured chants with the faint sweetness of herbs scattered on the fire. And when the mound was closed, when soil was patted down and grass began to grow, the objects within did not vanish. They became part of the landscape, folded into its silence. Even now, when archaeologists uncover them, their presence speaks not only of individuals, but of belief itself, that death was not an end, and that treasures could accompany the soul into unseen realms. The earth is mediator in all these acts, the burial of torques, the casting of swords, the placing of ornaments with the dead. A pattern appears. The earth was more than ground beneath feet. The earth was more than ground beneath feet. It was a mediator, a threshold, a surface that divided the visible from the invisible. You can almost feel it beneath your own steps now. The earth is not inert. It breathes, it listens, it remembers. To bury something within it was to send it across a boundary, to transfer it from human possession to sacred possession. And perhaps, for those who lived then, the act of giving was as important as the object itself. To let go, to break, to bury, to surrender. Each gesture created balance. The treasures unearthed today are remnants of this balance. Fragments of conversations between humans and the unseen. Conversations that lasted centuries, whispered again and again into soil and river. Midway re-anchor if you are still listening. Notice how slowly time drifts here. You don't need to hold every detail. Don't need to recall every artifact. It is enough simply to drift with the rhythm, like water moving over stones, like wind moving across grass. Let the story become a murmur, quiet sound beneath thought. The meaning of Destructor One, of the strangest patterns in Iron Age deposits, is deliberate destruction. Torques bent, swords broken, ornaments shattered. To us, this feels like ruin, but in their world, destruction was transformation. Imagine bending a golden ring until it snaps. The sound sharp in the night air. Imagine striking a blade against stone until it cracks, sparks fly. Each act removes the object from the human realm. It can no longer be worn, wielded, or traded. It belongs now to the other world. The very act of destruction was a ritual, a gesture filled with meaning. Breaking was not waste, it was release. And when we find these broken treasures today, dulled and silent, they still carry that moment of transformation. A memory of firelight chanting, and the final strike of metal against stone. Fields of hidden prayers. Think of Yorkshire's fields again. Wide, quiet, stretching beneath sky. Farmers plowed them, archaeologists surveyed them, walkers crossed them. Yet beneath, unseen, lie offerings. Some so small, a bead, a coin, others heavy and deliberate. Each one was placed with care. Each one a whisper into earth, a hope for harvest, a plea for safety, a thanksgiving for survival. You can almost hear them if you listen. Not words, but murmurs, a hush of hope that still lingers, folded deep within the soil. And it makes you wonder, how many prayers lie forgotten beneath the fields you pass? How many stories remain locked, waiting, unseen? Treasures as bridges ultimately. Treasures were not only wealth. There were bridges between people and gods, between life and death, between visible and invisible. To bury them was to create connection. To offer was to converse. To destroy was to release. And so, the treasures of the Iron Age remind us not only of craft or beauty, but of faith. A faith that the earth listens, that rivers remember, that ancestors walk near. Even if unseen. Closing drift, the owl calls again. The mist thickens. The ground beneath you feels steady, quiet, filled with secrets. You know now that treasures were not simply lost. They were given. Given to earth, to water, to silence. Given in hope, in reverence, in fear. And you cannot help but ask yourself, if earth itself is alive, how many offerings has it swallowed? How many whispers has it kept? How many voices still rest within its silence, waiting for us to remember that the ground we walk is never just ground at all. Asterisk, the night stretches longer now, and you find yourself standing not in silence, but in the quiet hum of a gathering. A fire burns at the center of a roundhouse, its smoke curling slowly upward. The smell of charred wood mingling with herbs tossed upon the flames. Around you, shadows shift along curved walls, and the sound of voices blends into a low, rhythmic murmur. Here, treasures gleam, not in solitude, but in company. They are part of the fabric of the community, bound to moments of feasting, to rituals of belonging, to the weaving of memory. To the people of the Iron Age, treasure was not only to be hidden beneath earth, it was also to be displayed, shared, and celebrated, before being surrendered again to silence. Feasting fires and shining ornaments. So imagine a long winter night when the harvest is stored, the animals sheltered, and the winds rattle the walls of the settlement. Inside, warmth glows from the fire, and food is passed from hand to hand. Roasted meat, thick stews, loaves, still steaming. The sound of laughter rises, yet beneath it, there is reverence too. 4 feasts were not only about filling stomachs, but also about weaving bonds. During such gatherings, treasures would emerge. A leader might wear a torque of gold, its coils catching the flicker of firelight. A warrior might lift a decorated shield, the metal patterns gleaming as he retold a tale of battle. A woman might pass along a finely carved brooch, fastening the cloak of another with symbolic care. The objects were more than decoration. They were carriers of memory. Each gleam in firelight told a story of lineage, of promise, of survival. And in the silence between songs, you would hear the quiet clink of metal, the soft brush of ornament against fabric, reminders that wealth was not private, but communal, displayed before all so that bonds might be strengthened. The ritual of gifting to us. Gifts are simple exchanges, but in the Iron Age, gifting was sacred. To give a treasure was to transfer not only an object, but also a part of the giver's identity. A torch given to another became a link binding families, tribes, and generations together. Imagine the moment. The fire crackles, the murmurs quiet, and the leader steps forward. In his hands rests a finely crafted sword. He presents it not to a son or daughter, but to an ally, someone outside his immediate bloodline. The gift is both a sign of trust and a demand for loyalty. The recipient takes it with solemn hands, and from that moment, the bond is sealed. These exchanges were not trivial. They were embedded in cycles of survival, for communities needed one another in times of hunger, in moments of defense. Treasures thus moved across hands, across tribes, carrying with them invisible threads of obligation and honor. And when archaeologists unearth treasures today, often in places far from where they were made, these movements whisper of old networks of alliances sealed in the glow of firelight, of identities woven across landscapes, treasures in the cycle of seasons. Year itself was marked not only by farming and herding, but by ritual gatherings tied to sun and moon. At midsummer, fires were lit upon hills. At midwinter, light was coaxed back with song and flame. In harvest, thanks were given for bounty. In spring, hopes were cast for renewal. During these moments, treasures played their role. Ornaments were displayed, sometimes worn only for these occasions. Vessels of bronze or clay, finely decorated, were filled with drink and passed from hand to hand. Blades gleamed in dances around fires. Each object carried symbolic weight, tying the rhythm of human life to the cycle of nature. Picture yourself at one of these moments. The air is sharp with the scent of pine torches. The crowd sways in song, the rhythm of drums echoing against the hills. In the firelight, gold gleams, bronze shimmers, and silver reflects flickers of flame. Treasures here are not silent. They sing in their way, amplifying the voice of the community, marking the turning of time. And when the rituals end, sometimes the treasures are put away, but often they are offered, buried, cast, or broken, as if each seasonal celebration needed to be sealed with a gift to the unseen. Midway re-anchor reef, you are still listening. Notice how slowly time moves here. The voices of feasts, the clink of treasures, the rhythm of drums, they rise and fade like waves. You do not need to recall each detail, each torque, each vessel. It is enough to drift with the sound, letting the story become a hum beneath thought. Treasures as identity communities, Candy Iron Age did not leave behind written words. Their stories were carried in voices, in memory, and in objects. And so, treasures became texts of a kind, silent writings, etched in metal, patterns carved in stone, meanings woven into fabric. A torque told of power, a decorated shield spoke of courage, a vessel inscribed with spiral designs whispered of ritual. Each object anchored identity, not only of individuals, but of entire groups. To see a leader where gold was to see the tribe reflected in him. To hold a gifted ornament was to feel one's place in the web of kinship. Treasures thus stitched people together. They were not kept in hidden boxes, but shown, shared, moved, and transformed. Their presence reminded all who saw them that survival was collective. That identity was larger than the self. The silence after celebration, after the feast. After the fire dies down, silence returns. You can almost feel it now, the air heavy with the smell of smoke, the last embers glowing faintly, the faint shuffle of those drifting into sleep. And in the stillness, treasures rest too. Some are hidden away until the next gathering. Others are taken, carried into fields, broken, and buried. It is this rhythm that fascinates, the shift between presence and absence. An object shines one night before many, and then it vanishes beneath soil, given to the unseen. To us, it may seem contradictory. Why show what will be surrendered? But to them, the showing and the giving were part of the same cycle. The community displayed, celebrated, remembered. Then he gave, surrendered, balanced. And in this rhythm, identity was renewed again and again. Treasures and memory think now of how memory itself was carried. Without books, without written records, the community relied on voices, on stories told in repetition. Yet, voices fade, and so treasures became anchors of memory. A torque reminded of a battle won. A vessel recalled a feast shared. A vessel recalled a feast shared. A blade whispered of an ancestor who once held it. When such objects were shown, they stirred memory alive. When they were buried, they sealed memory into the earth, as if to say, let this not be forgotten, even if voices fade. In this way, Yorkshire soil became a library of sorts, not of words, but of offerings, each one a page in the silent text of community identity. Closing drift, the firelight fades now, and the night grows still. The treasures have been shown, their gleam reflected in many eyes. Some remain, passed carefully into hiding places. Others vanish into soil, broken and surrendered. The community rests, knowing that their identity is bound not only to the living, but to the objects they carry, the gifts they give, and the silence they leave behind. And as you walk across quiet fields today, you may wonder how many unseen treasures beneath your feet were once the shining heart of a feast, once the bond of an alliance, once the memory of a people who believed that identity itself could be folded into gold, into bronze, into earth. Asterisk, the night is deeper now. You hear only the faint rustle of wind across grass, the sigh of distant trees, and the low crackle of embers that refuse to die. In this silence, you sense something more, a presence woven into the land itself, a weight of memory in unseen eyes. For in the Iron Age, treasures were not only for the living, they were also for the dead, perhaps for forces beyond human sight. Burial offerings, treasures for the journey. Imagine standing at the edge of a grave cut into chalk or clay. The earth is cool, damp, and heavy with the smell of rain. Within the pit lies a body, cloaked and adorned. Around it, treasures are placed, a torque around the neck, a shield at the side, a vessel filled with food or drink. Each object is carefully chosen, as if composing a story to accompany the dead into whatever world lay beyond to the living. These were not random ornaments. They were gifts for the journey, tokens to honor the dead, and perhaps provisions for another life. The burial itself was both farewell and continuity, a reminder that the deceased was not gone, but transformed, still bound to the tribe through treasure, through memory, through ritual. Archaeologists uncover such graves across Yorkshire, their contents whispering of beliefs that were never written, but lived. The objects tell us that to these people, death did not erase identity. It only shifted it, and treasures mark that passage. You can almost hear it, the shuffle of feet at the edge of the grave, the murmurs of farewell, the clink of metal as objects touched soil. Then silence, as earth covered both body and treasure, sealing the unseen bond between the living and the dead. Treasures as guardian sum. Treasures were not buried with individuals, but placed in earth or water alone, as if guarding something invisible. A sword bent deliberately before burial, a cauldron submerged in a bog, a brooch snapped before being cast into a pit. To break an object was not to destroy it, but to release it. The act marked a shift from the realm of human use to that of spirit or ancestor. Such gestures suggest that treasures were seen as alive in their own way, carrying essence, power, and presence. Picture a warrior lowering his own sword into a pit after bending it across a stone. The clang of metal echoes, sharp and final. Around him, silence falls. The treasure, once his, is now beyond reach, guarding something unseen. These moments remind us that treasures were not merely symbols of wealth. They were vessels of power, guardians of thresholds, gifts that bound the tribe to forces larger than themselves. Ancestors in the soil too. Walk across Yorkshire fields in the Iron Age was not to walk alone. Beneath the ground lay generations, bones, offerings, treasures, creating a landscape thick with memory. Every mound, every pit, every marked place carried the presence of ancestors. When treasures were buried, they joined this unseen community. Each torque, each blade, each vessel became part of a silent dialogue between past and present. For those who lived then, the earth itself was layered with presence. Each treasure, a voice in the great chorus of ancestry. And so, daily life unfolded not only among the living, but also in constant awareness of those below. Every footstep across a field, every fire lit at night, every feast held in a roundhouse resonated with unseen witnesses. You might feel it now, the press of silence. The sense that beneath your feet lies more than stone and soil, that the earth itself is alive with memory, heavy with treasures surrendered long ago. Ritual landscapes across Yorkshire. Treasures appear not only in graves, but also in places shaped for ritual hilltops, springs, rivers, and bogs. These were landscapes where the human and the unseen touched, where offerings were made to gods, two spirits, two forces tied to land and sky. Imagine a stream at twilight, its waters reflecting the glow of torches. Figures gather at the edge, their cloaks heavy with dew. One steps forward, holding a vessel of bronze, finely patterned. With solemn care, it is lowered into the water, slipping beneath ripples until it vanishes. The act is quiet, almost invisible, yet to those gathered, it is immense. A treasure, once crafted and used, is now beyond retrieval. It belongs to the stream, to the spirit of water, to the cycle of balance. Such rituals remind us that treasures were not clung to as possessions. They were always in motion, shown, shared, gifted, buried, broken, submerged. Each movement stitched the community closer to its landscape, closer to unseen forces. Midway, re-anchor if you are still listening. Notice how slowly these images drift. A burial pit, a broken sword, a vessel slipping beneath water. Each moves like a ripple, fading into silence. You do not need to hold on to the details. It is enough to let them pass like waves in a long night, carrying you deeper into rest. Treasures as voices of the gods. We cannot know precisely how Iron Age people spoke of gods. No texts survive, only echoes in later traditions. Yet the pattern of treasures suggests belief in forces beyond human sight. Forces that demanded balance, offering, respect. When a tribe surrendered gold, when they buried weapons, when they cast ornaments into water, they were not merely discarding. They were conversing, giving to the gods so that life might continue, so that harvests might grow, so that war might be survived. In this way, treasures became voices. Each buried torque was a prayer. Each broken blade was a petition. Each submerged vessel was a whisper into the vast silence of sky and earth. And so, when archaeologists uncovered these objects, they are not simply unearthing metal. They are uncovering conversations, half of a dialogue spoken long ago, the other half lost in the wind. The rhythm of surrender. What strikes us most is the rhythm. Treasures gleam, then vanish. They are shown, then surrendered. They are displayed in feasts, then buried in silence. This rhythm reflects a belief that possession was never permanent. Wealth was not something to hoard endlessly, but something to move, to gift, to return. To keep treasure forever was to disturb balance. To surrender, it was to align with cycles larger than the self. And perhaps this is why Yorkshire soil is so heavy with offerings. Each one marks the rhythm of survival, of reverence, of surrender. The silence of discovery now pictured the modern moment. A spade strikes earth, a glimmer appears, and a treasure, long hidden, comes to light. For a brief instant, the silence of centuries is broken. Yet what is uncovered is incomplete, for the meaning cannot be fully recovered. The prayers, the rituals, the voices that gave it life remain beyond reach. And so each discovery is a paradox: presence without voice, object without context, treasure without its original meaning. What remains is mystery, an echo of belief too deep to be fully grasped. Closing drift, the night closes now, and the fire is gone. Only stars remain, scattered across a wide, dark sky. Beneath you, the soil is thick with offerings, each one a whisper sealed long ago. Treasures gleamed in firelight, then sank into earth. They marked identity, sealed alliances, honored the dead, spoke to gods. Now they rest in silence, their voices hushed, their meaning folded into soil. And you may wonder, when the people gave so much to the earth, what did they believe they would receive in return? Was it survival, memory, balance, or simply the comfort of knowing that nothing was ever truly lost? Only hidden, waiting beneath the silence of time. Asterisk, the wind softens as you imagine another scene, a narrow track winding through rolling hills. The earth damp with dew, the distant call of a raven echoing across the moor. Along this path, figures move slowly, cloaked against the chill, their hands guiding carts or carrying bundles. They are travelers, merchants, wanderers, people who carried with them not only goods, but stories, and among their bundles, treasures gleamed faintly. A brooch of unfamiliar style, a bead of glass shimmering with color unseen in local clay, a coin marked with patterns not born of this soil. Each object is a fragment of a distant world, carried along routes that stretched across seas and rivers, binding Yorkshire's earth to lands far beyond its horizon. The hum of movement in the Iron Age. Life often feels to us as though it were isolated, villages small and self-contained. But listen closely and you hear another rhythm, the steady hum of movement, of roads that led outward, of rivers that carried boats, of coasts that opened to the sea. Picture the Humber estuary, its waters broad and shifting with tide. Boats bob there, carved from single trees or lashed with planks, their sails catching the wind. From their decks, baskets and sacks are lifted, filled with salt, with grain, with pottery, with metal, with pottery, with metal. And within these exchanges, treasures move too, slipping from one hand to another, crossing miles upon miles until they find rest in new soil. The sound is faint but steady, the slap of water against wood, the creak of rope, the murmur of voices negotiating in words shaped by different tongues. In this way, Yorkshire was never isolated. It was part of a web, threads stretching outward, binding its earth to the wide world. Beads of distant fire, one of the most telling treasures, unearthed from Iron Age graves and hoards, is the glass bead, bright, shimmering, sometimes swirling with colors of blue, green, or amber. These beads did not emerge from local craft alone. Some came from workshops far away from across the channel, from Mediterranean lands, even from places where furnaces burned hotter and techniques had been honed for centuries. Imagine the wonder of such an object in a Yorkshire settlement. A bead glowing in firelight, smooth to the touch, unlike stone or clay. To hold it was to hold the distant, a fragment of another world resting in one's hand. And so, glass beads became treasures of identity and connection. They marked those who possessed them as people linked not only to their own community, but to wider networks that stretched into mystery. When buried with the dead, they whispered of journeys never taken by the body, but carried by the bead itself, coins and echoes of empires later in the Iron Age. As Rome pressed closer, coins began to appear in Britain. Some were minted locally, stamped with tribal symbols. Others were imported, marked with faces and designs from across the sea. Picture a coin resting in soil, its surface worn, its patterns faint, yet its presence unmistakable. It told of empires rising elsewhere, of armies marching, of trade flowing along routes that connected even distant Yorkshire to events it could not see before the people who held them. Coins were not always currency in the way we know it. They could be symbols, gifts, tokens of alliance. Their gleam carried not only material value, but also the echo of foreign power. And when such coins were buried, they joined local treasures in weaving identity. They were proof that Yorkshire was not isolated, but listening faintly, distantly, to the drumbeat of empires beyond its horizon. Midway re-Ankarif, you are still listening. Notice how gently these images drift. A bead glowing in firelight, a coin pressed into earth, a boat rocking in tide. You don't need to follow every detail. It is enough to let them blur softly like echoes in mist, carrying you deeper into stillness. Treasures as bridges for those who lived then. Foreign treasures were more than exotic ornaments. They were bridges. They told of journeys not taken, lands not seen, people never met, and yet, through the object, all were connected. A brooch from Gaul carried whispers of its maker's hands. A bead from the Mediterranean shimmered with fire from furnaces far away. A coin from Rome carried the face of a ruler never seen, yet whose presence was pressed into metal and carried across seas. To hold such an object was to touch distance itself, to feel one's life stretched outward into horizons unseen. And perhaps this is why they were treasured so deeply, why they were displayed in feasts, worn in ritual, buried with reverence. They were not merely things, they were connections. The unseen hands of traders' archaeology cannot always trace the people themselves, the traders, the Kias, the wanderers, the ones who carried these treasures along. Yet if you listen, you can almost imagine them, figures walking along muddy tracks, guiding carts through forests, stepping onto boats with cautious balance. Their voices carried accents unfamiliar. Their hands bore calluses from long journeys. They may have stayed briefly in settlements, sharing meals, exchanging stories by firelight. Then they moved on, leaving behind objects that would outlast them: beads, brooches, coins, vessels. The treasures remain. The traders are gone. Yet in some way, their presence lingers, folded into the soil, waiting to be unearthed centuries later. Treasures of salt and iron. Not all treasures gleamed with gold. Some were bound to survival itself. Salt, drawn from sea or spring, was traded across lands, its crystals as precious as ornaments. Iron, mined and smelted, was forged into tools and weapons, strength transforming daily life. And when these materials moved, they carried with them the essence of distant places. Salt from one shore mingled with grain from another. Iron from a mine traveled to a forge, then to a battlefield, then to a grave. Each step added layers of meaning, weaving distant lands into the life of Yorkshire. In this way, even the simplest treasures, a bar of salt, a lump of iron, were part of the same rhythm of movement, binding communities together through exchange. The silence of buried networks. What strikes us when looking back is how much of this movement has vanished. The traders' names, the routes they took, the bargains struck in torchlight, all are gone. What remains are the treasures, silent fragments of a vast network now dissolved. A bead in a grave, a coin in a hoard, a brooch in the soil. Each is a whisper of journeys untold, of connections lost to time. And so, when we walk Yorkshire fields today, we may feel not only the presence of ancestors beneath, but also the faint hum of distant lands, of seas crossed, of rivers followed, of footsteps taken by those who left no trace but objects. Closing drifts, the night deepens, the wind stills. You stand once more on a quiet path, the earth soft beneath your feet, the sky wide above. You sense that you are not alone, that every bead, every coin, every vessel buried beneath you is a fragment of a greater whole, a web that once bound Yorkshire to lands far beyond. And you wonder, when people here held a treasure from far away, did they feel the distance close? Did they imagine themselves joined to unseen communities, bound by objects that shimmered with both presence and mystery? Asterisk, the air is colder now, and you hear a distant rhythm, not the hum of trade or the murmur of feasts, but the steady beat of footsteps, the metallic ring of blades against shields. The Iron Age was never free from conflict. Tribes clashed, raiders struck, alliances were made and broken. And in all these shifts, treasures played their part, both as spoils of war and as symbols of peace. Weapons as treasure to us. A sword is a weapon. But in the Iron Age, a sword was also a treasure. It was not simply forged. It was crafted with care, often decorated, sometimes handed down across generations. Each blade carried the memory of battles fought, of victories claimed, of oaths sworn. Imagine a warrior holding such a sword by firelight. Its edge gleams, but so to do the patterns etched into its hilt. The weapon is heavy, but heavier still is its meaning. It is not only for killing, but for identity, for honor, for belonging. When archaeologists uncover swords bent and buried, we glimpse this duality. To bend a blade was to end its use in war and to release it into another realm, transforming it from weapon to offering. The clang of metal against stone, the final gesture of bending, marked a shift from violence to reverence. Shields and the silence of defense shields, too, were more than wood and metal. They were canvases for identity, painted or patterned to display belonging. To carry a shield into battle was to carry not only protection, but a statement. This is who we are. This is what we defend. Picture a shield raised against blows, its surface scarred and dented. Later, perhaps, it is hung in a roundhouse, a silent reminder of survival. Or perhaps it is buried, its wood rotting, its metal fittings enduring a treasure surrendered to earth, its echoes fading into soil. Each shield whispered of conflict endured, of communities defended, of the thin line between destruction and safety. Spoils of raiding conflict was not only defensive, raiding was part of life, swift and sudden, a means of survival as much as aggression. Cattle were driven away, grain seized, ornaments taken. Treasures moved in this way, not through trade, but through violence. Imagine a raid at dawn, the shouts, the clash of iron, the pounding of hooves. Amid the chaos, objects are seized, a torque ripped from a neck, a vessel carried off, a weapon claimed. For those who survived, the absence of these objects was as loud as the cries of battle. Yet, in time, even raided treasures could be transformed. What was once taken violently might later be buried reverently, becoming part of ritual. Violence and reverence were not separate worlds, but part of the same cycle. Peace sealed with treasure. Conflict also bred peace, fragile, shifting, but vital for survival. And when peace was made, treasures marked the moment. A torque gifted to an enemy turned ally, a decorated vessel exchanged between leaders, a coin pressed into another's hand as a sign of trust. These exchanges were not mere gestures. They were acts that turned former enemies into kin, if only for a time. To give treasure was to give part of oneself, to bind two groups in obligation. Picture the scene. Leaders face one another. The memory of battle still heavy in the air. Hands extend, and between them rests a treasure. The exchange is silent, solemn, and for a time, balance holds. Treasures in hoards. Signs of fear and hope. Archaeologists often find hoards, collections of treasures buried together, hidden beneath earth. Some were offerings, but others may have been born of fear. Treasures hidden in times of conflict, sealed away for safety, never retrieved. Imagine a family burying torques and coins as raiders approach. The ground is cold, the hole hurriedly dug. Objects are lowered, covered, and left with hope of recovery. Yet, if the family did not survive, the hoard remained, waiting in silence for centuries. Waiting in silence for centuries. Each hoard tells the tension of the thin line between fear and hope, between loss and survival. They are treasures not of abundance, but of anxiety, of the human need to protect what is precious in moments of danger. Midway re-anchor reef, you are still listening. Notice how these stories rise and fade like waves. The clang of swords, the silence of shields, the hurried burial of hoards. Each image passes, leaving behind only echoes. You do not need to follow every detail. It is enough to let the rhythm drift, carrying you deeper into quiet. The cost of survival conflict demanded more than weapons and treasures. It demanded resilience. For every battle fought, there were families who endured hunger, children who grew up in fear, elders who remembered quieter times. Treasures marked these costs too. A vessel passed down after a leader's death, a brooch worn in mourning, a sword buried not with a warrior, but with his kin. In this way, treasures became part of the human story of survival. They carried not only the gleam of gold or bronze, but also the weight of grief, of endurance, of memory. Treasures as symbols of unity despite conflict. Treasures often drew people together. When worn in ritual, when exchanged in peace, when buried in shared ceremonies. They reminded communities of bonds stronger than division. Picture a festival after peace has been declared. Fires burn, songs rise, and treasures gleam once more. Not as spoils, but as symbols of unity. Each torch worn, each vessel passed, each shield displayed reminds all that survival depends not only on strength, but on balance, on connection, on trust. The silence after battle. When battles ended, silence returned. The cries faded, the weapons stilled, the fires dimmed. And in that silence, treasures remained, some broken, some buried, some passed into new hands. Today, we uncover them in soil, but we do not hear the voices that once surrounded them. We do not hear the clash, the cries, the solemn vows of peace. What remains are objects, silent yet heavy, whispering of both violence and reconciliation. Closing drift, the night deepens, and the sounds of conflict fade into memory. You hear only the faint wind, the whisper of earth, the slow rhythm of your own breath. Treasures gleamed in battle, then lay quiet in soil. They sealed alliances, marked peace, carried grief, and now they rest beneath Yorkshire's earth, waiting for discovery, waiting to whisper their stories once more. And you may wonder, when a treasure was given in peace, did its gleam linger in memory longer than the clash of battle? Did the silence after war hold more weight than the noise that came before? Asterisk, the air is hushed now, as though the earth itself is listening. You hear the soft sigh of wind through grass, the gentle murmur of a distant stream, and the faint rustle of branches shifting in the night. In this quiet, treasures seem no longer bound to hands, or to battles, or to trade. Instead, they shimmer at the edges of vision, belonging as much to the unseen as to the seen. For in the Iron Age, treasures were not merely wealth or weapons. They were part of a cosmic balance, symbols of a world where the human, the natural, and the supernatural flowed together without sharp divisions. Offerings to rivers and springsmen. Imagine clear spring bubbling from earth, its waters cold, pure, and shining in sunlight. To us, it is only water. But to the people of the Iron Age, such places were thresholds, entrances to other realms. homes of spirits or gods who watched and listened. At such places, treasures were offered, torques lowered into water, vessels filled and then submerged, weapons cast into currents. To surrender treasure to water was to acknowledge that life itself depended upon unseen forces. That balance was maintained not only by labor, but by reverence. Picture the scene at twilight. Figures gather at the edge of a river, torches flickering, their flames reflected in rippling water. A hand lifts a decorated brooch, gleaming one last time in firelight before letting it fall. It slips beneath the surface, lost to human eyes, yet bound to the rhythm of faith. And as the night deepens, silence folds in. The water flows on, carrying away offerings, carrying whispers into darkness, treasures. In the turning of seasons, the Iron Age year was marked by cycles, sowing and harvest, light and dark, death and renewal. At each turning, treasures played their role. Fires were lit upon hills at midsummer, their glow reaching across valleys. At midwinter, when nights stretched long, people coaxed light back with flame and song. During these gatherings, treasures gleamed, ornaments worn only at certain times, vessels filled with drink and passed in ritual, weapons displayed not for battle but for ceremony. Each object tied the community to the turning of time, marking the human rhythm against the greater cycles of nature. Imagine standing upon a hill at midsummer. Fires roar, sparks rising into the night sky. Around you, songs echo, drums beat, and treasures gleam in the glow. Each torch catches firelight. Each vessel reflects flickers of flame. These are not displays of wealth, but of balanced symbols that human survival is bound to sun, to earth, to the endless wheel of seasons. Midway, re-anchoring, you are still listening. Notice how these images rise and fade like breath. The gleam of treasures in firelight, the ripple of water swallowing offerings, the hush of seasons turning. Each passes softly, leaving only echoes. You don't need to remember them all. It is enough to let them drift as time itself drifts, carrying you deeper into stillness. The mystery of broken treasures. Often find treasures deliberately broken, swords bent, vessels shattered, ornaments snapped. To us, it may seem like destruction, but to those who lived then, breaking was transformation. To break a sword was to release its spirit. To shatter a vessel was to free its essence. To snap a brooch was to change its meaning from adornment to offering. Picture a ritual at dusk. A vessel is lifted, its surface patterned with spirals. A blow is struck, it cracks, and the sound echoes across silence. Fragments are then buried, each piece a whisper, each shard part of a greater offering. Such acts remind us that treasures were not clung to. They were surrendered, transformed, released. The Iron Age world was not about possession, but about movement, the shifting of things between hands, between earth and sky, between seen and unseen. Treasures and cosmic symbols patterns etched into treasures often repeat spirals, circles, lines that turn without end. These were not decoration alone. They were symbols, reflections of beliefs that saw the cosmos as endless, cyclical, flowing. A spiral on a brooch may have spoken of life's return, of death followed by renewal. A circle etched into a shield may have bound a warrior to the sun, to the eternal turning of day and night. When such treasures gleamed in ritual, they did more than shine. They echoed the cosmos itself. Each pattern was a reminder that human life was a reflection of greater rhythms. That balance could be found by aligning with cycles beyond the self, ancestors, and the unscented people of the Iron Age. Treasures tied not only to gods, but to ancestors. Each offering to soil, each object buried in a grave, each gift given in ceremony wove the living to the dead. Picture a feast in winter. The fire burns low, the smell of smoke heavy in the air. Around the circle, elders speak of those who came before, their voices hushed and reverent. In the center rests a vessel filled with drink, passed not only among the living, but also raised in honor of the unseen. Treasures given to the earth were gifts not only to gods, but to ancestors, to the silent community beneath soil. Each offering was a conversation, a reminder that survival was never the work of the present alone, but of generations stretching backward, unseen yet near. Ritual landscapes across Yorkshire. Certain places appear again and again in the record of treasures, rivers, bogs, hilltops, and boundaries. These were not random sites. They were landscapes of ritual, places where human and cosmic worlds touched. Imagine a bog at dawn, surface misted, the air thick with silence. A sword is lifted, bent, and lowered into dark water. The act is quiet, yet immense. The treasure vanishes, but its presence lingers in memory, in faith, in silence. Each offering stitched a community to its landscape. The land was not empty. It was alive, filled with spirits, ancestors, forces beyond sight. And treasures were the thread, tying human lives to earth, water, sky. Midway reassurance, you don't have to recall each offering, each sword, each vessel. It is enough to feel the rhythm, treasures shown, treasures surrendered, treasures hidden. The details blur into a single wave of giving and releasing, flowing endlessly like the turning of seasons. The quiet after ritual, when offerings were made, when treasures were buried or cast into water, silence followed. The voices hushed, the torches dimmed, the crowd dispersed. Yet in the minds of those who walked away, balance had been restored. The earth had received its gifts, the gods their offerings, the ancestors their due. The treasures lay beneath soil, beneath water, hidden from sight, but alive in meaning. And those who walked away knew they were not alone. Every step across fields, every look at sky, every whisper of wind was felt as part of a conversation larger than themselves. The mystery that remains today when we unearth these treasures. We see objects, bent swords, broken vessels, torques gleaming faintly with age, but their original meaning remains half hidden. The prayers spoken, the rituals performed, the beliefs lived, these are gone, leaving only silence. These are gone, leaving only silence. Yet, perhaps, that is fitting. For these treasures were meant not to be fully understood, but to bind the living to mystery, to fold human survival into cycles of nature, into rhythms of cosmos. Their silence today continues that purpose, reminding us of a world where meaning was never fully seen, only felt. Closing drift, the night is deep now. The air is still. The earth rests heavy with treasures, each one a whisper of faith, of ritual, of cosmic balance. You stand upon Yorkshire's soil, sensing beneath your feet not only objects, but prayers folded into metal, offerings surrendered to water, patterns etched into bronze. Each treasure is a voice of the unseen, a fragment of belief, too vast to grasp, too quiet to fade. And you may wonder, when people gave so much to the earth, to water, to sky, what did they feel return? Was it protection, survival, blessing? Or was it simply the stillness that comes when balance is restored, when the world feels whole again, if only for a night? Asterisk, the ground is quiet beneath you now, its surface marked only by grass bending in the wind and the faint crunch of soil beneath your step. Yet beneath this stillness, deep in the earth, lie the echoes of lives long vanished. Buried treasures, torques, vessels, weapons rest in silence, waiting through centuries, untouched by human hands, untouched by memory. You hear the wind's low murmur, a sound unchanged since those objects were placed in soil. You notice how the sky drifts with clouds, shadows stretching across the land, shadows not so different from those that fell when people of the Iron Age walked here. And as you breathe the cool air, you sense the weight of time pressing, folding, flowing endlessly downward. The moment of burial, imagine the act itself. A group gathered at the edge of a field. The smell of earth, sharp as soil, is turned. A torque is lowered, gleaming faintly in twilight. A vessel follows, its patterned surface catching the last light of day. Soil closes over them, slowly, softly, until all is hidden. The act is both final and eternal. To bury treasure is to give it away, but also to preserve it. In that moment, people may have believed they were speaking to gods or ancestors, or sealing power into earth itself. Yet unknowingly, they also began a silence that would last centuries, longer than their lives, longer than their children's lives, longer than their memory could stretch. And so the treasures waited. Darkness folded around them, earth pressed close. Time passed without pause. The centuries of stillness, the Roman legions marched into Britain. They built roads, forts, and towns, their sandals striking stone, their standards flashing in sun. Yet beneath Yorkshire's soil, the treasures of the Iron Age remained undisturbed. Their silence unbroken. After Rome came centuries of kingdoms, of shifting borders, of battles fought with sword and shield. Churches rose, bells rang, fields were plowed anew, and still, beneath the earth, treasures waited, unknown, unremembered. You can almost hear the layers of history passing overhead, the clang of Roman iron, call of Anglo-Saxon voices, the roll of Norman hooves, the cry of medieval markets, all of it flowing like waves above soil that held its secrets tightly. Midway reassurance, as if you are still listening. Notice how the silence beneath the earth feels steady, slow, without end. You don't have to follow each change, each century. It is enough to let time drift past you like wind across a field. The details blur into a single rhythm of waiting, of stillness, of treasures held in darkness. The accidental discoveries centuries later. A farmer digs into soil, his spade striking something harder than stone. The sound is sharp, unexpected. He kneels, brushing away soil, revealing the curve of bronze, the glint of gold. Such discoveries often began with surprise, even confusion. A plowshare turning up fragments, a workman unearthing a vessel, a child finding a brooch gleaming faintly in mud. These were not planned excavations, but accidents, moments when the silence of earth gave way suddenly, spilling fragments of the past into the present. Imagine the shock of lifting a torque, heavy and gleaming, from soil that has not touched light in nearly 2,000 years. The smell of earth clings to it, damp and sharp, yet its surface shines with the touch of hands long gone. In that moment, past and present fold together, the silence of centuries broken by a single breath of wonder, the rise of curiosity by the 18th and 19th centuries. Discoveries grew more frequent. Antiquarians, gentlemen collectors, local scholars, and curious wanderers began to gather such objects, recording them, sometimes preserving them, sometimes losing them again. The treasures were lifted from earth and placed in cabinets, their silence exchanged for curiosity. They became part of collections, sometimes studied, sometimes displayed, sometimes left to gather dust. Each object carried a weight of mystery, a question without full answer. Who had owned it? Why had it been buried? What meaning had it once held? Picture an antiquarian study, lamplight glowing on polished wood, shadows stretching across shelves lined with objects. A torque rests upon velvet, its curve catching light. Outside, rain taps against the window, the world beyond dim. Inside, the object gleams, its silence replaced by speculation. The archaeologists touch in time. Archaeology became more careful, more deliberate. Excavations revealed treasures not by accident, but through method, through patience, through soil sifted slowly, layer by layer. Imagine kneeling in a trench, trowel in hand, the smell of damp earth rising as you scrape gently, uncovering a vessel intact after centuries. You pause, breath caught, aware that you are the first to touch this surface since the day it was buried. The silence of centuries folds around you, broken only by the sound of earth shifting, of breath slowing, of time revealing itself piece by piece. Each treasure lifted now was no longer only an object. It became part of a story, mapped, studied, compared, its meaning approached, if never fully grasped. Yet, even in the hands of archaeologists, each treasure retained its silence, its mystery, its refusal to be entirely explained. The weight of mystery today. Many of these treasures rest in museums. Behind glass, under soft light, they gleam still, torques coiled like golden serpents. Vessels patterned with spirals, brooches shaped with care. Visitors walk past, their footsteps echoing in quiet halls, their whispers drifting like faint breezes. But for all the labels and explanations, the treasures remain silent. Their meaning is never fully revealed. The prayers spoken when they were buried, the rituals performed, the beliefs whispered into them, these are gone, leaving only fragments. And so, the silence continues. The treasures speak, not through words, but through presence, to the quiet weight of mystery that clings to them still. Midway, re-anchoring, you're still listening. Notice how slowly time feels here. The centuries pass like waves, the discoveries rise and fade like breath. You don't have to remember each step, each figure, each moment. It is enough to drift with the sound, letting the silence of treasures become part of your own stillness. Treasures, as time mirrors each treasure, when lifted from soil, is more than metal or ornament. It is a mirror of time itself, a fragment of lives that once were, a reflection of hands that once held, a whisper of voices that once prayed. You may imagine standing before such an object in a museum. Around you, the air is quiet, the light soft. You lean closer, noticing patterns, noticing the curve of metal, the marks of craft. And in that moment, you feel not only curiosity, but connection. The silence of the treasure folds into your own silence, reminding you that the distance between past and present is never complete. Closing drift 4. Section 1. The night deepens. The air grows still, and Yorkshire's earth continues to hold its secrets. Beneath fields and rivers, treasures still rest, untouched, unseen, waiting in silence. Some will be discovered, lifted into light. Others will remain forever hidden, their meaning locked within soil. And you may wonder, when the people of the Iron Age buried their treasures, did they know how long the silence would last? Did they imagine voices centuries later, speaking their names, touching their ornaments, asking their questions? Or did they believe the earth itself would keep their secrets forever, holding them in darkness until time itself was done? Asterisk, the air in the gallery is still held in careful balance by unseen machines. You hear the faint hum of climate control, a sound that folds into the silence like a low, endless breath. Before you, under glass, lies a torque, its golden curves catching soft light. It is ancient, yet immediate. A fragment of the Iron Age lifted from Yorkshire soil into the gaze of the present. You lean closer, and for a moment, the centuries dissolve. You see the gleam as it once was, warm in firelight, resting on a neck, surrounded by voices, drums, and chants. And then the glass folds you back into silence. It's the object still, the air cool, the distance eternal. From soil to glass, the path, from burial to museum, was never simple. For centuries, treasures emerged by accident, turned by a plow, uncovered by rain, stumbled upon in quarries. The earth gave them up reluctantly, one fragment at a time. Picture a farmer in the damp dawn, his spade striking something hollow. He bends, brushes soil away, revealing a vessel with spirals carved deep. Around him, the mist clings to the hedges. The birds are only just beginning their chorus. He holds the object, unsure whether to keep it, to sell it, or to bury it again. The treasure's silence has been broken, but its meaning remains unclear. Over time, as curiosity grew, more careful hands arrived. Antiquarians of the 18th century, with quills and notebooks, recorded such finds. They often placed objects in cabinets, arranging them like puzzle pieces, trying to glimpse the world of the ancients through fragments of gold, bronze, and clay. The treasures shifted meaning in these spaces. What was once a sacred offering became a specimen. What was once a voice and ritual became a silent exhibit. And yet, through this transformation, the objects survived, not buried again in soil, but resting now in the light of study. Reassurance. Lupith, you're still listening. Notice how slowly this unfolds. You don't need to remember the names, the dates, the collectors. It is enough to drift with a sense of movement from earth to hand, from cabinet to glass. Let the thought of objects, shifting quietly through time, become a rhythm you float upon. The scholars' questions. By the 19th century, ecology began to take shape as a science. Care replaced accident. Instead of only stumbling upon treasures, men and women set out to find them, digging with purpose, mapping with care. Imagine such an excavation. A trench opens in Yorkshire's fields, soil piled high at its edges. The air is cool, the smell of clay sharp, the sound of trowels scraping steady. Slowly, a brooch emerges, its pin still sharp, its design still visible despite centuries in earth. The archaeologists pause, hands gentle, notebooks ready. They sketch, they measure, they ask questions. What ritual had buried this? What belief had guided the hand that lowered it? Was it wealth set aside in worship, or protection offered to the gods, or wealth concealed in fear of raids? Each discovery invited questions, yet never offered answers in full. The treasures spoke only in fragments, refusing complete explanation. The silence of centuries clung to them still, cues even under the most careful gaze. Echoes in museums by the 20th century. Many of Yorkshire's Iron Age treasures had found homes in museums. Some were displayed in glass cases, softly lit, their descriptions typed on labels. Others lay in drawers, preserved but unseen, touched only by curators in gloves. Picture yourself walking through such a gallery. The floors are polished, your footsteps echo faintly. The air smells faintly of varnish and dust. You pause before torque, its golden curves gleaming. Beyond the glass, you imagine the firelight in which it once shone, the ritual in which it once played a part. And then you glance at the label. Words, neat but spare. Iron Age torque. Found in Yorkshire, c. 100 BC to 100 AD. The silence deepens, because words never quite meet the weight of what you feel. Midway re-anchor reef, you're still listening. Notice how the silence feels thicker now, in soil, in glass, in memory. You don't have to hold the details of archaeology, nor the names of periods. Let them drift away like mist. It is enough to stay with the quiet unfolding, the movement of treasures from hidden earth to visible light. Treasures as symbols to scholars. Treasures were evidence, proof of a culture, of a history written not with ink, but with metal and stone. To the public, they became symbols, golden torques representing a warrior's strength, decorated vessels representing a community's art, brooches representing daily life. But what did they mean to the people who had buried them? That silence remains. You may imagine a community gathering at night, torches flickering, the smell of wood smoke heavy in the air. Voices chant, the treasure lowered into soil, the earth pressed close. To them, the act was not history, not evidence, not symbol, but offering, sacrifice, devotion, or protection. The meaning is lost, yet the weight lingers. In the museum, under glass, the treasure gleams. You stand before it, separated by centuries and silence, yet bound by curiosity, the persistence of mystery even as archaeology advanced. Even as techniques of dating and analysis grew sharper, the silence of meaning could not be broken. Science could measure composition, trace origins, map patterns, even detect residues of ancient fires. but it could not uncover the whisper spoken when the treasures were lowered into soil. And so, every discovery remains partly unresolved. Every treasure remains partly a question. That unresolved quality is part of their power. It draws you closer, makes you lean in, makes you wonder, and then it drifts away again, leaving silence behind. Treasures in modern Yorkshire today. Yorkshire is alive with modern life. Trains crossing bridges, cars rushing down motorways, shops lit with neon. Yet, beneath it all, the soil still holds what has not yet been found. Fields still hide fragments. Rivers still conceal vessels. Hills still protect ornaments buried long ago. You may picture yourself standing in such a field at dusk. The wind folds across grass. The sky dims. The soil lies heavy beneath. Somewhere beneath your feet, something rests. A fragment of bronze, a piece of gold, a vessel unbroken. It is waiting, silent, unseen. And you may wonder how many treasures remain untouched, undiscovered, holding their silence still. Closing drift for Section 2, the treasures of Yorkshire remind us of the strange balance between discovery and silence. To unearth them is to break centuries of stillness, to bring light where darkness reigned. Yet even in discovery, their meanings remain partly hidden. Their voices still veiled. And so they stand between worlds, once buried, now visible, once alive in ritual, now silent in glass. They remind us that history is never fully known, only glimpsed, only touched at its edges. And perhaps that is what gives them power, the silence itself, the refusal to be explained, the mystery that deepens the more we look. And you may ask yourself, softly, as the silence folds around again, are the treasures speaking still, in their own way, in whispers too faint for us to hear? Asterisk, the night is hushed in Yorkshire's countryside. You stand at the edge of a field, the wind folding through hedges, carrying the scent of damp earth and moss. A faint glow lingers in the sky, fading into darkness. Beneath the soil, unseen, lie fragments of a world long vanished treasures, once hidden, once lifted into ritual, once pressed into the earth with solemn hands. Above ground, the world is alive with farms, houses, and roads. Yet the treasures, whether resting beneath or gleaming in glass, continue to ripple outward in meaning. They shape how people see their land, their history, and themselves. And so we move into their echoes, not just in gold or bronze, but in memory, in identity, in the quiet imagination that carries through time the shaping of identity in the rolling hills of Yorkshire. The Iron Age feels far away, yet close. Villages rise where settlements once stood. Roads follow ancient lines. Rivers still flow as they always have. The treasures, unearthed one by one, remind modern Yorkshire that beneath the familiar lies a deeper age, when farmers found torques in their fields, when archaeologists lifted vessels from soil, when museums placed them in glass. The discoveries wove into the identity of the land. Yorkshire was no longer just farms and mills, coal and stone. It was also ancient ritual, ancient craft, ancient wealth buried in silence. And so, when people walk through the galleries, or when they read of treasures in the news, they feel a thread that ties them to the deep past. The treasures whisper that life here has always been layered, always older than it seems. Reassurance, Lupif, you're still listening. Notice how slowly this unfolds. You don't have to hold on to details of excavation or dates. You can let them drift, like mist across a valley. It is enough to feel the quiet presence of treasures shaping identity, not in sharp lines, but in soft ripples. The imagination of ritual every treasure discovered suggests not only wealth, but ritual. Torques, vessels, brooches, they were more than possessions. They were offerings, symbols, parts of ceremonies, now long forgotten. Modern imagination returns again and again to those rituals. Writers describe firelit gatherings, with voices rising and drums sounding across the hills. Artists sketch people lowering treasures into earth, their hands steady, their faces solemn. Teachers tell children of communities that spoke through ritual, using treasures as words the earth could keep. The truth is partly unknowable, yet the imagination fills the silence, layering new meaning on old fragments. And so the treasures live again, not in the exact way they once did, but in visions that echo ritual, that bring firelight back to gold, that bring voices back to soil. The role of museums and quiet galleries, the treasures rest. You may walk through one on a gray afternoon, your footsteps soft, your reflection faint in the glass. The air smells faintly of dust, the silence broken only by distant murmurs. Here, the treasures shape public memory. Labels describe them, scholars explain them, visitors pause before them. Yet beyond the words and explanations, something quieter lingers, the awareness that these objects come from a world we cannot fully know. Museums hold them gently, right, offering both preservation and distance. They invite you to wonder, yet never answer completely. They keep the treasures in light, yet leave their silence intact. And in this balance, the treasures remain alive, not by being explained, but by continuing to hold mystery. Midway re-anchor reef, you're still listening. Notice how time feels slower now. The rhythm of footsteps in galleries, the stillness of fields at dusk, the silence of glass cases. They fold together into one long breath. You don't need to remember details of museums or rituals. It is enough to drift with the sense of echoes moving outward, always gentle, always unresolved. The persistence of mystery. The persistence of mystery. Even with science, with carbon dating, with chemical analysis, treasures remain partly beyond reach. Scholars may tell us when they were buried, what metals they contain, how they were crafted, yet why they were lowered into the earth, what prayers were whispered, what hopes or fears pressed into soil. Those remain in silence. And so, the treasures continue to hold mystery. They remind us that history is not only fact, but absence, not only evidence, but a question. For those who live in Yorkshire today, the treasures invite humility, the awareness that the land holds more than can be seen, that the soil beneath fields still conceals voices, gestures, and meanings lost to time. Echoes in the landscape walk through Yorkshire's countryside, and you feel the layers. The hedgerows curve along lines older than memory, rivers cut through valleys that have seen centuries of hands. Beneath the fields, beneath the moors, treasures rest still, sometimes. After rain, the soil shifts and fragments surface. Sometimes, construction uncovers what was hidden, and sometimes treasures remain undisturbed, holding their silence through another century. You may pause on a hill, the wind folding across grass, and feel the weight of what lies beneath. It does not speak, yet it shapes the way the land feels. The silence itself becomes part of the atmosphere, part of the identity, the ordinary and the extraordinary for those who buried the treasures. Perhaps the act was ordinary, rituals repeated, offerings made, wealth given to the gods. For us, it fills extraordinary fragments of gold and bronze unearthed centuries later. This tension lingers. What was ordinary to them becomes mysterious to us. What they did in rhythm, we see as a puzzle. What they buried in faith, we lived in curiosity. And yet, in both views, the treasures hold power. To them, they were sacred. To us, they are silent wonders. The difference does not erase the connection. It deepens. It closing drift for section 3. And so, the treasures of Yorkshire continue to shape the present. They are not only objects of gold and bronze, not only evidence of an age. They are echoes in identity, in imagination, in landscape, in silence. They remind us that beneath every field lies another story, that beneath every step lies another memory. They remind us that history is both presence and absence, both discovery and mystery. And as you drift with these thoughts, the silence folds around again. You may find yourself wondering, are there treasures still resting beneath your own feet? Waiting to be found? Waiting to remain? Holding their silence for centuries more.